When my daughter and her husband went into the water off Cape Foulweather, the Coast Guard told me to prepare for the worst, and I did what fathers do. I prepared. What I wasn't prepared for was a lawyer I'd never heard of calling me 4 days later, asking me to come downtown, and sliding a small brass key across his desk like it was the most ordinary thing in the world. He said my daughter had left me something, and that I needed to see it with my own eyes. I'm going to tell you the whole thing, start to finish, because I've carried it long enough. But before I do, leave me a comment and tell me where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. It helps me know I'm not just talking to an empty room. I'm 68. I spent 31 years as a detective with the Salem Police Department, most of it working homicides, and I'll tell you, I thought I'd developed a stomach for the worst of people. I thought there wasn't a lie left in this world that could surprise me. That's the kind of pride that comes right before the fall. The call came on a Sunday. I was out in the garage running a board through the planer building a bench for the church when my cell buzzed against the workbench and rattled the dust. I almost didn't hear it over the motor. When I picked up, a woman from the Coast Guard station at Newport asked me if I was the father of Cora Lane. My hands were still gloved in sawdust. I said yes. She said there'd been a capsizing. My daughter and her husband had taken their sailboat out Saturday afternoon. A squall rolled in faster than the forecast called for, and the boat had gone over near the headland. They'd recovered Cora's body that morning. Her husband, Garrett, was still missing, presumed lost. I sat down on an overturned bucket and stayed there a long time. I remember the planer was still running. I let it run. My wife Marion passed 11 years ago. Breast cancer. We had one child, Cora, and after Marion went, that girl was everything I had left. She lived 2 hours up the road in Portland, worked as a pediatric nurse, married a man named Garrett 4 years back. I'll be honest, I never warmed to him the way I wanted to. Real estate guy. Big smile. Always a deal closing next week that was going to change everything. But Cora loved him, and she seemed happy. And I'd learned the hard way that a father who picks fights with his daughter's husband just ends up seeing his daughter less. So I kept my mouth shut, came up for holidays, fixed whatever needed fixing in their house, and drove home. The funeral was a small thing, a Tuesday morning at the same Methodist church in Salem where Marion and I were married. Cora's nursing friends came down. A few of Garrett's people. Since they never found his body, we did one service for the both of them, though it sat wrong with me even then, mourning a man whose body the sea still hadn't given back. I sat in the front pew and I felt like the last leaf on a tree in November. It was right after, while folks were filing out into a cold drizzle, that a man in a charcoal overcoat caught me by the elbow. Maybe 60, silver hair, the kind of calm you only get from a career of holding other people's worst secrets. He told me his name was Theodore Brandt, that he was my daughter's attorney, and that he was sorry for my loss. I just looked at him. Cora had never once mentioned a lawyer. She was a nurse. What did a nurse need with a lawyer in a $300 coat? He asked if we could speak privately, and we stepped into the little side room where the church keeps the choir robes. He set his briefcase on a folding chair, opened it, and took out a single brass key on a worn leather fob. He told me Cora had come to see him a little over 5 months ago, that she'd made very specific arrangements, that she'd been adamant, those were his words, very adamant, that the moment anything happened to her, I was to receive this key and an address, and no one else was to be told. What address? I asked him. He handed me a folded sheet of paper. In Cora's handwriting, which I'd know anywhere, was an address out near Detroit Lake, up in the Cascades. A place I'd never been. He told me she'd bought a cabin there, that she'd asked him to hold certain things in trust and release them only to me in person once she was gone. Why on earth wouldn't she tell me? I said. Brandt looked at me for a moment, and there was something in his face I've spent a long time trying to name. It wasn't just lawyer sympathy, it was the look of a man who knows the worst is still coming and can't say so. I think, he said carefully, she wanted you to understand it in the right order. She left a great deal there for you, Mr. Holloway. You'll want to go alone. I drove up to the lake 3 days later. The road follows the Santiam River through the pass. And that morning the firs were dripping and the clouds were sitting low on the ridgelines like they didn't want to leave. I found the address at the end of a gravel lane, a small cedar-shingled cabin with a green metal roof, a stone chimney, and a deck that looked straight out over the water. I sat in my truck with the engine ticking and just stared at it, because the truth hit me all at once. Marion and I used to talk about a place exactly like this, a cabin on a lake where I could fish in the mornings and finally, after all those years of overtime, just be still. We never had the money. We always said, someday. The key turned in the lock like it had been waiting for me. Inside, the place was finished down to the smallest detail. Wood stove, a leather chair already broken in, bookshelves stocked with the westerns and history books I read. On the kitchen counter, a coffee maker and my brand of coffee. On the mantel, a framed photo. Marion, Cora, and me at a county fair maybe 20 years back, all of us squinting into the sun. Cora, maybe 12, and holding a stuffed bear she'd won. I had to put my hand on the wall to steady myself. My girl had built me the life her mother and I never got around to living, and she'd done it without saying a single word. I walked the room slow, and in the bedroom, propped against the pillow like something left by a hotel maid, was an envelope with one word on the front. Dad. I sat on the edge of that bed for a while before I could open it. When I did, her handwriting filled the page. Dad, if you're reading this, then you found my surprise, and I'm not there to see your face, which is the only part of this that breaks my heart. You and Mom always talked about a place on the water. I wanted you to have it. There's something else here, though, something I couldn't put in a letter and couldn't say to you out loud because I knew you'd try to fix it, and this one you couldn't. In the hall closet, behind the water heater panel, there's a small safe. The code is Mom's birthday month, day, year. Open it. Watch what's inside before you do anything else. I love you more than I ever managed to tell you. Cora. My hands weren't steady, but I found the panel, and behind it the safe grey steel set into the wall. I keyed in Marion's birthday, and it opened with a little electronic chirp that sounded obscene in all that quiet. Inside were a few things neatly arranged. A laptop, 2 thick accordion folders, a small flash drive in a paper sleeve, and a sticky note in her hand. Laptop first, Dad. The drive's already in it. Press play. I carried the laptop out to the kitchen table, sat down, and opened it. The video was cued. I pressed the spacebar, and my daughter's face filled the screen. She was sitting in this same cabin, the lake behind her through the window, and she looked thin. Thinner than the last time I'd seen her at Easter, when she'd worn a loose sweater and told me she'd just been busy. Her cheekbones stood out. But she smiled, that crooked smile she got from her mother, and she said, "Hi, Dad. I'm not ashamed to tell you I reached out and touched the screen. If you're watching this," she said, "then a lot of things have happened and I owe you an explanation for all of them. I'm going to give it to you the best I can. First, the cabin. I know you're sitting there wondering how a pediatric nurse bought a place on Detroit Lake. I've been planning this for over a year, since before you'll understand why. I sold some things. I moved some money. Mom would have wanted you here, Dad. She told me once, you remember she used to say you had stories in you, and no quiet place to tell them. This is your quiet place now." She paused and took a breath, and the smile slipped just a little. "There's a harder thing I have to tell you, and there's no soft way in. I'm sick, Dad. Pancreatic cancer. By the time they caught it, it was stage 4. They gave me 6 months, and that was almost 5 months ago. I doubled over the table like the wind had been knocked out of me. My only child, dying, and I'd been driving home from Easter dinner thinking she looked tired. On the screen she kept going, steady the way she always handled the hard things, the way I taught her without ever meaning to. I didn't tell you because I watched what losing Mom did to you. Those last months, the hospital, the hoping and the hoping crushed. I couldn't stand the idea of you watching me go the same way, sitting in another waiting room with another cup of bad coffee, learning the names of more drugs. I wanted whatever time I had to be normal. I wanted you to fix my port trailing and complain about my coffee, and have no idea anything was wrong. I'm sorry. I know that was a selfish kind of mercy." She wiped her eyes, and so did I. Most of what I had I put into making sure you're taken care of. The cabin's yours, free and clear. There's a trust Mr. Brand set up. Your truck's paid off. Yeah, I did, Dad. Don't be mad. You won't have to worry about money, Dad. Not ever. And then her face changed. The grief in it hardened into something I knew from across 30 years of interview rooms. It was the face of someone who has decided to tell the truth no matter the cost. But that's not the only reason I'm gone, Dad. And it's not the reason you think. I need you to keep watching because the next part is why I made you open that safe before you talk to anybody. I want to stop here and tell you that as a homicide detective, I always told young officers the same thing. The people closest to the victim are the place you start. Not because family is evil, because love and money and betrayal live in the same house more often than anybody wants to admit. I'd said it 100 times. I just never once thought I'd be sitting at a kitchen table hearing my own daughter say it to me from beyond the grave. About 8 months ago, she said, I found out Garrett was having an affair. I won't bore you with how. A phone left unlocked, a charge and a card for a hotel in Bend the same weekend he told me he was at a conference in Seattle. Her name is Sloan. She works at his brokerage. They'd been together almost a year. She let out a breath that was half a laugh, the bitter kind. I was diagnosed 2 weeks after I found out. So there I was, dying, and finding out my husband was already halfway gone. She leaned toward the camera. I almost forgave it. I told myself a man finds out his wife is terminal, maybe he panics, maybe he runs to somebody. I almost let it go, Dad. Then I found the policies. I opened the first folder while her voice kept going. Inside were copies of 3 life insurance policies, each with my daughter's name on it, each carrying a signature that was supposed to be hers. I've looked at a lot of forged documents in my life. The hand was close. Somebody had practiced. But the loop on the C was too tight, and the tail on the R ran the wrong direction. My daughter signed her name like she was in a hurry to get somewhere better. Whoever wrote these had taken their time. I never signed those, she said, as if she could see me sorting the pages. I never even knew they existed until I went looking. One's for $500,000. Garrett's the beneficiary. One's for $400,000, payable to a holding company Garrett set up 2 years ago. And the third is for $300,000, and the beneficiary is Sloan Avery, listed as a business associate. She shook her head slowly. $1.2 million, Dad. On the life of a nurse who never made more than $70,000 a year. Somebody bought the kind of policy on me you buy on a CEO, and they did it while I was getting chemo. I sat back in the chair. The cabin was dead quiet except for the lake slapping at the dock outside. I hired a private investigator, she said. Her name's Rita Salazar. Her card and her full report are in the second folder. I needed proof that wasn't just a wise word. She got photos. She got financials. She got Garrett's recent debts, which are bad. Dad, really bad. He's underwater on 3 properties. He's got a man in Phoenix he owes money he can't pay. He doesn't have $1 million. But I'm worth $1 million to him dead. And the doctors had already told the world I was going to be dead soon anyway. I opened the second folder with my hands shaking. The photos were exactly what she said. Garrett and a younger woman, blonde, leaving a hotel, the 2 of them at a restaurant table, fingers laced together. A printout of bank records with figures circled in red, and clipped to the back, a typed page from Salazar laying out a recent trip the 2 of them had taken. To Scout, the report said, property in Belize. A country I happen to know that's awfully friendly about money you'd rather nobody could trace. On the screen, Cora's voice dropped lower. Here's where I have to be honest about what I did, Dad, because you of all people will understand it. I was going to die. 6 months, maybe less. And I realized that if I just let it happen, if I died in a hospital bed like everyone expected, Garrett collects $1 million, marries Sloan, and walks off into the sunset, and nobody ever asks a single question. The cancer would be the perfect murder weapon. Except he wouldn't even have to lift a hand. He'd just have to wait. And the worst part, the part that kept me up at night, was thinking about you. Because once the money ran out, and it always runs out with men like him, what's to stop them from looking at your account next? At Mom's life insurance? At this cabin? I couldn't let it stand. I couldn't go to my grave knowing I'd left those two pointed at you. I gripped the edge of the table. I knew, in the way you know the end of a story you've heard before, where this was going. So I made a decision, she said. I started recording. I put a voice recorder in the house. The small one's in the safe. The files are backed up on the drive and to a cloud account, Mr. Brandt has the password too, so don't worry, nothing in this depends on one little device surviving anything. I have everything in 3 places, Dad. I learned that from you. You always said a thing isn't real evidence until it exists somewhere it can't be destroyed. I let out a sound that was half a sob and half a laugh because she had me there. She had listened. All those years I thought she was tuning me out at the dinner table. She'd been taking notes. I caught them, Dad, on a recording from the kitchen 3 weeks before now. Listen to it. Then take all of this to someone you trust. Not the local department, someone who can move on insurance fraud across state lines, and a man who's about to disappear. You'll know who. You always do. The video ended on her face, holding the camera's eye, and then it went black, and I was alone again in the cabin with the lake breathing against the shore. I found the recorder in the safe. A little silver thing, no bigger than a lighter. I sat there a long while before I could make myself press the button. The audio was clear. 2 voices. A man's. Garrett's. I knew it instantly, that easy salesman's cadence, even when he was talking about something monstrous. And a woman's, light and cold. The doctors keep saying any week now, the woman said. But any week now has been a month. She's tougher than she looks, Garrett said. I married a stubborn woman. A small laugh from the woman. Then we could help it along. People do. There are ways. A pause on the recording that felt like it lasted a year. No, Garrett said, and for half a second I almost thought better of him. Then he finished. No, that leaves marks. We don't touch her. We let nature do it, and we make sure the paperwork's clean. The boat's the backup. If she rallies, if those new trials buy her another year we can't afford to wait on, then there's the boat. Accidents happen out there all the time. And you, the woman said, if you're not careful. If it comes to the boat, I go in too, on paper, he said. Body never found. Insurance pays out to you and the holding company. I sit tight in Belize. 6 months, a year, the noise dies down, and Garrett Lane is just a guy who drowned trying to save his sick wife. They'll put me in the paper as a hero. I shut the recorder off. My hands had gone numb. Out on the lake, a fishing boat pottered by. 2 men in it laughing at something, the most ordinary thing in the world, and I sat in a dead woman's cabin and understood that my daughter hadn't drowned in an accident. She'd gone out on that boat knowing the man steering it had already discussed killing her on it. She'd gone anyway, because she was already dying, and because she'd decided that her death was going to mean something instead of nothing. She'd turned herself into the proof. I don't know how long I sat there. The light moved across the floor. At some point I realized I was praying, which I hadn't done with any seriousness since the night Marion passed, and I wasn't asking for comfort. I was asking for the strength to do this right. Then I picked up my phone and called Hank Mosley. Hank and I came up together at Salem PD. He left for the stateside years back, then got pulled onto a federal task force in Portland. Financial crimes, mostly, fraud and the money that follows it. We hadn't talked in maybe 2 years, the way men our age let things slide, but he answered on the 3rd ring and said, Cal Holloway, I was wondering if you'd call. I heard about your girl. I am so sorry, brother. Hank, I said, and my voice didn't sound like mine. I need you to listen to me, and I need you to not tell me I'm a grieving old man, because I know exactly what I sound like. My daughter was murdered, her husband's not dead, and I can prove all of it. There was a long silence. Then, instead of the gentle letdown I half expected, I heard a chair creak and a pen click. The old reflex. Start from the top, he said. Don't leave anything out. I told him everything. The cabin, the video, the policies, the photos, Salazar's report, the recording. When I got to the part about the boat being the backup plan, I heard him exhale, slow. Cal, he said, That recording, that's a man laying out a murder and an insurance fraud and a fake death. Cross-state, offshore, the whole thing. That's not a local case, that's mine. Bring me everything. Bring me copies and tell me where the originals live, and don't you dare touch the cloud account until I've got a preservation order. I drove down to Portland that evening with the folders on the passenger seat, belted in like a passenger. I met Hank in a federal building that smelled like every government building I've ever been in, burnt coffee and floor wax, and we sat in a conference room until almost midnight while he and a younger agent went through it page by page. They ran Garrett's name. They ran Sloan Avery's. They confirmed the policies were active and that the medical underwriting had been waved through fast, too fast, by an agent Sloan happened to work with. When they played the recording, the younger agent stopped taking notes and just stared at the table. Hank looked at me when it was over and he said, "I have to ask you something, and I need a straight answer. If he faked his death and he's sitting on a beach somewhere, this could take a long time. Months. Maybe more. International cooperation is slow and ugly. Are you up for that?" I thought about my daughter, thin in that cabin, smiling at the camera, telling me she'd backed everything up in 3 places because her old man taught her how. "My girl spent the last months of her life building a case so this couldn't be swept under the rug," I said. "I'll wait as long as it takes." It took 11 months. I'm not going to pretend those were easy months. I stayed at the cabin most of the time because the empty house in Salem was worse. I'd wake before light and walk down to the dock and watch the mist come off the water, and I'd talk to Cora out loud, which I'm sure looked like a crazy old man to the neighbors, the Olsons, who waved at me kindly and kept their distance. Hank called every couple weeks. The financial unit was tracing money through shell companies, following it the way you'd follow a deer trail, a bent branch here, a print in the mud there. The holding company had wired funds to an account in Belize. The Belize account had paid a deposit on a beachfront property. And slowly, the way these things go, a name surfaced, a Mr. Gordon Lewis, American who'd shown up in Placentia about 3 months after a sailing accident in Oregon, paying cash, growing a beard, keeping to himself. On a grey morning in March, my phone rang at 6. It was Hank. "We've got him," he said. "Both of them." Belizean authorities picked Garrett up at the property yesterday. Sloan was in Houston. She got greedy and came back stateside to fight one of the insurers that was dragging its feet on the payout, and we were waiting. "Cal, your daughter was right about all of it. He went in the water on paper and walked out a free man, just like he said." I had to sit down on the dock. The boards were cold and damp through my jeans. "When?" I managed. "Extradition'll take a couple months for him. Sloan's already in custody here. But it's happening. It's all happening, Cal, because of what your girl put in that safe." Garrett Lane was extradited that summer. The trial ran the better part of 3 weeks in a federal courtroom in Portland, and I sat in the front row for every day of it. He'd shaved a beard. He wore a grey suit and the same easy expression, and the first day, when they brought him in, he looked at me across the room and I saw him try the smile, the one that used to land a deal, and I just looked back at him until he looked away. I testified on the second day. They walked me through the cabin, the safe, the video, the folders. They played the recording for the jury, and I watched 12 strangers' faces change in real time, watched a woman in the second row press her hand to her mouth. The defense did exactly what I expected, because I've seen it from the other side 100 times. They went after my daughter. Their argument was that a woman dying of stage 4 cancer, on heavy medication, terrified and grieving, had become paranoid and obsessive, that she'd built an elaborate fantasy of betrayal out of her own fear of death, that the recording was ambiguous, the policies a misunderstanding, the affair just an affair. They wanted that jury to believe my Cora was a sick woman imagining monsters. I'll tell you the truth, that was the hardest part. Harder than the funeral. Sitting there listening to a lawyer in a nice suit suggest that the disease in my daughter's body had also been in her mind. I had to grip the rail of that bench to keep still. But here's the thing about evidence gathered by a careful person, and my daughter was the most careful person I ever raised. It doesn't bend. The policies were forged. A handwriting examiner said so under oath, and pointed to the same loop on the C that I'd seen at the kitchen table. The money trail to Belize was real and documented. The fake death was, by definition, a fraud Garrett himself had committed. You can't drown on paper and then turn up tan and breathing without that being a crime. No illness explains. And the recording was the recording. A jury can argue about a sick woman's state of mind. They can't argue with a man's own voice planning where his wife's body would go. It was Sloane who finished him in the end. Facing her own charges, she took a deal and testified, and on the stand she turned on him like a snake that had been stepped on. She said it was Garrett's idea from the start, that he was the one who pushed to let nature do it and keep the boat in his back pocket. Garrett came halfway out of his chair shouting that she'd been the one counting the days, and the judge had to gavel him down, and in that one moment the whole easy salesman's mask came off and the jury saw what was underneath. They were back in under 5 hours. Guilty, murder, fraud, the works. The judge gave Garrett Lane life without parole. Sloane got 22 years on her reduced charges. As the marshals let him out, Garrett finally looked at me again, and there was no smile left in him at all. Just a kind of stunned anger. The look of a man who'd been so sure he was smarter than everyone in the room, and had just learned otherwise from a dead woman. I drove back up to the lake that night. I sat on the dock in the dark and I told her, "We got them, sweetheart," I said out loud to the water. "You got them, you did it." And for the first time in 11 months, I slept the whole night through. People asked me sometimes, the ones who've heard pieces of this, what I did with the money. Because there was money, the trust, the cabin, and eventually a settlement from the insurers, who were rather motivated to make things right once it came out. How easily their policies had been forged. It came to more than I'll ever need. A man my age, alone, doesn't have much use for that kind of figure. So I gave most of it away. There's a research centre at the university in Portland, and they've got a wing now working on early detection for pancreatic cancer, the kind that hides until it's too late, the kind that hid in my daughter until she had no time left to fight it. $2 million in Cora Lane's name. Dr. Million's name. Anand, who runs the program, told me the funding would let them chase a blood test that might catch the thing 2 years sooner than anybody can today. 2 years. My girl would have given anything for 2 years. Now maybe somebody's daughter gets them. I kept the cabin. I still wait before light and walk down to the dock. And I finally started writing. Not the great novel Marion always swore I had in me, just an honest account of all of it, the one I'm telling you now, because I think the lessons in it are worth more than I could ever pay back. The first one is the one I'd give any father or grandfather watching this. Love the people in your family, but don't let that love make you stop seeing. I drove home from a dozen holidays telling myself everything was fine because I wanted it to be fine. My daughter was dying and being hunted under my own nose, and I noticed nothing because I'd decided ahead of time there was nothing to notice. Evil doesn't show up looking like evil. It shows up at Thanksgiving with a nice bottle of wine and a firm handshake and a smile that closes deals. The second is that the truth has to live somewhere it can't be destroyed. My daughter learned that from me without my ever knowing she was listening, and it's the only reason any of this came to light. Put your honest things in writing. Tell the people you love what they need to know while you can still say it. And the last thing, the thing I hold on to on the hard mornings, is that my Cora turned her own death into a shield for me, and then into hope for strangers she'll never meet. The Lord didn't spare her. I've stopped asking why, but he took the worst thing that ever happened to my family and let some good come out of it, and I have to believe that's not an accident, any more than that boat was. If you've ever been betrayed by someone you trusted, by someone who sat at your table and called you family, know that you're not alone, and know that what's hidden has a way of coming to light. Tell me your story in the comments below, and if this one meant something to you, stay with me, because I've got more of them to tell. For a long time I sat on that dock at first light and turned the same question over. How did I miss it? My own daughter was dying and being hunted, and I drove home from every holiday telling myself the smiles were real because I wanted them to be. That's the thing about loving people. It can make you generous, and it can make you blind, and I was both. If I'd looked at Garrett the way I'd looked at 100 suspects across 100 tables, I might have seen the man underneath the handshake sooner. I didn't, because I'd already decided there was nothing to see. The lesson cost me more than I can say, but Cora saw clearly when it counted, and that's what saved me. She didn't act on rage when she found out about the affair. She didn't confront him in a parking lot and tip her hand. She thought. She hired Rita, she gathered the policies, she put the recordings in 3 places because she remembered an old man telling her at the dinner table that the truth isn't safe until it can't be destroyed. Her judgment was cold and patient when her heart must have been on fire. That clear thinking, more than anything, is why Garrett is in a cell and Sloane is counting down 22 years instead of spending my money on a beach in Belize. Greed made them careless. She made sure carelessness was all it took. And then there was the simple matter of doing the right thing when it would have been so much easier not to. Cora was already out of time. She could have spent her last months on a beach of her own, bitter and quiet, and let nature hand those two everything they wanted. Nobody would have blamed her. Instead, she chose to leave the world cleaner than she found it, to protect a father who hadn't even known he was in danger. That choice didn't come from being smart. It came from the kind of character you can't fake, the kind that decides who you are when no one is watching, and the cost is everything. What I'd want any father or grandfather to take from this is that none of those 3 things is enough alone. Knowing what's right doesn't matter if you're too soft to see the truth in front of you. Seeing clearly doesn't matter if you don't have the backbone to act. And all the backbone in the world is dangerous in a person without a conscience to point it. My daughter had all 3 at once in her worst months with her body failing her, and she beat 2 people who had only greed. I kept the cabin, I write here now, and every morning I tell her the same thing I told her the night the verdict came in. You did it, sweetheart. You really did.